before we open up the floor for question and answer. And we will go in the order that you are seated. So I am excited to welcome to the podium Mrs. Loretta Butler Turner. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. When he said that we'd start in the order that we're seated, first of all, I thought he'd go virtually, and then I thought he would actually go from left to right, but that's okay. Good afternoon, everyone here who's with us in person. It's such a delight to be able to share in this COVID environment, also with those of you virtually. This is obviously becoming the norm in the way that we meet. And I'm happy and I'm hoping that there are many persons that are joining us.
Recording in progress.
First of all, I would like to commend org for this great initiative. I think that it is really important that the private sector, the public sector, and all of us who are stakeholders in society can be engaged. And org, the Organization for Responsible Governance, has really taken the lead in holding us as a people accountable and to be knowledgeable about governance. Today, they've asked me to speak on equity and participatory, increasing women's participation in politics and youth participation in governance. And some of the questions that we will be looking at are, what are the ongoing obstacles to bringing more women to serve in elected positions, and how do we move past these? What are the current opportunities to expand youth roles and involvement in governance? And how do we build more equitable institutions that engage historically marginalized groups into national development? And I'm glad they said marginalized groups, because when you look at gender equality, there are areas where I hasten to add that our male counterparts sometimes feel marginalized as well. So we cannot have a national discussion just about moving women forward and moving youth forward. It really has to be about equity. And I'm going to ask the moderator to keep me on time, because as I explained to him earlier, I usually speak extemporaneously, and that's exactly what I'm doing today. So in starting, I want to share a story with you. Last year, the Bahamas went into national general elections. And in the lead up to that, you know, we're a very political society. We're always having political discussions. No matter whether you're at a funeral or whether you're at a party, somehow politics always rises to the fore in our discussions. Whether you're DNA, PLP, or F&M, we always have vibrant discussions in our social gatherings regarding politics. So as we led up to the general elections last year and the various political organizations were rolling out their candidates, there were quite a few women who had received the nominations for their particular organization. And in a social setting, there were a group of us sitting around, and someone said, well, did you see such and such? You know, she's running in such and such a place. Well, what make her think she should be running in politics? Now, that was a woman talking about a female who had come forward to be a part of our democratic process and running. So I listened to the conversation for a bit, and then I asked her, I said, excuse me, well, what about the opponents and the sitting person that's the incumbent? What do you think about them? Oh, well, I don't really know much about them. I said, well, they've been the MP for the past 4.5 years. You don't know anything about them? Why don't we compare the candidates as opposed to us being derogatory about someone who's putting their name forward, themselves forward to be of service to our country? I said, I know a little bit about the incumbent, and I'd like to share with you so that we can do a comparative analysis of the persons that are running for this particular constituency. By the time we had finished that conversation, and we did strengths and weaknesses of each candidate, thank God that same woman She won, and she now serves in government today. And this is where we need to begin to arrest our conversations. Because if a woman puts herself forward to run, then why are we so critical about her, but yet we're not critical about her opponent, especially if it's a male? So do you simply have to be male to show up and you get the free ride? No, I'm not suggesting that. But in our minds, that is where we are at. When some of our women in the Bahamas were running for leadership or positions within their parties, there were comments made, why she don't go home, go cook for her husband? Or, in my case, why is she so vocal? Where is her husband? Well, I'm proud to say that my husband is always, always my biggest advocate. You don't have to see him, but he's the strength beneath my wings. And so he's always there. When I show up, he's there. So these are the sort of discussions I think that help in keeping women, in this instance, away from putting themselves forward to serve our country. When we want to have these national discussions and discourse on gender and growing the amount of women there are, let us be fair and let us analyze all the participants, whether they're male or female. Let's do a strength and weakness analysis. Let's look at everything so that when we do go to make our democratic choice, we're not doing it based on gender, we're doing it based on ability. That's the first thing. You know, as a young child, I had the opportunity to be blessed with very good educational institutions that I attended. Kingsway Academy, St. Andrew's School, and later, New England Institute of Technology. And you know, one of the things, even though I come from a very political background, I never imagined that politics was in my blood, so to speak. But what I did have, and this is something I want to throw out as a challenge, not just to org, but to other social partners, what I did have was a strong appreciation for extracurricular activities that included things like the debate societies, the public speaking societies. Yes, the other extracurricular things such as swimming and soccer and all of those are important. But if JA can be established in schools to help students understand what it is to be competitive in the business world, then why is it that we cannot have more organizations that are teaching our students at a very early age how to debate, how to public speak? So org, you want an answer to how we can help to get youth participation, which I think is important. What we need to do is create topical issues that our youth can become engaged in and have them debate them, discuss them, write about them, and that begins to engage them out of the virtual world and into reality. If we want to know about climate change and how our government should deal with it, how about doing a debate? First, it starts within your school, then it expands to inter-school, then it expands to a national level. And we televise this, and we share this, and we get our youths engaged, because one of the things we know is to write is to think. When you write, you think. We will produce better persons who can stand on their feet and speak without prepared speeches that they're not familiar with, or that they cannot pronounce certain, you understand what I mean, literacy and numeracy. If we start preparing our youth at an early age, this is what I did, and I didn't even know I was going into politics. But what it did, it made me start to think about those things. When we had the debates, not only at my school, but it became national debates, we were able to talk about issues that were topical, issues that spoke to what affects us as a society. Many times people say, oh, you know, young people don't want to vote. They don't see how it affects them. They do not see how it affects them because we do not engage them. If we engage them at this level and at other levels, they will start to become thinkers. They will start to understand that the world does not revolve around them and their iPad, but that the world actually revolves around all of us. So I would recommend, in terms of youth participation, and I think it's very strong, just as I said, junior achievement creates business persons within the school model. Let us start creating legislators within the school level. People have got to understand their constitution, and so when debates arise about gender equality, some ill-informed person cannot tell a student that this is a debate on transgender or this is a debate on gay rights, because they will understand their constitution, because we've created debates for them to understand these things. Of course, this has to be undergirded by a stronger civics teaching curriculum in our schools. Because all too often, as much as we like to debate politics among ourselves in social environments, there are many of us, if you listen to them and you hear the erroneous things that are shared, or even on talk shows, that many people will take away. We need to ensure that people are getting the right information. Now, I'm not going to be long because I'm sure that we've been running a bit late. I'm just going to go to the last question with regards to how do we build equitable institutions that engage historically marginalized groups? If a woman wanted to be a rocket scientist a few decades ago, people would look at her strangely and say, well, don't you think you should consider just being the data entry clerk or something for a computer? If a male wanted to be a nurse, people would look at him and say, well, why you want to be a nurse? I thought that was for women. The point I'm making here is we've got to stop stereotyping our children. Let's get it right from the very start. When John and Jean are born, they can both rise to be presidents of anything, whether it's president of the United States or prime minister of the Bahamas. Jane should have no less a right than John to have that sort of reinforcement that she is capable. That is where it starts. So once we move away from the stereotypical manner in which we address our gender, and that we make people understand that it's about your ability, your passion, your conviction, that you can do something, then I think we will overcome a lot of those hurdles. So ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I want to say that not just in the Bahamas, but around the world, women make up 50% of the population. If we marginalize and determine that we don't need women in this sector or in that sector, you're losing that proportion of your intellectual capacity. You're losing the input from 50% of your population. Men, boys, women, and girls, they need to understand, especially in a world of today, that it takes all of us to make this world a better place. In closing, I'll just give you a few examples of outstanding leadership of women, because one of the things they say about women is, oh, they're too emotional. You know, they just have that time a month, and then they got to have babies, and they got to have this. And thank goodness that men can now stay home now when they have babies too, Because when last I checked, a family is not just the woman and the child. It took two to make the baby, so why shouldn't the husband be there helping with nighttime nursing as well? Those are some of the barriers, and I think we do that here in the Bahamas now. We allow fathers to have paternity leave. That's very important. But at the end of the day, look at what happened during COVID. Those same emotional women who led great countries, whether it's the 3 northern European countries, whether it's our neighbor over in Barbados, whether it's persons in other parts of the world. Do you know Australia and all of them, the best handling of the COVID and management within countries were done mostly by females. So clearly, women can multitask, they can work under pressure, and they can be effective. Not to diminish the fact that men can do the same. When we talk about equity, we've got to realize that that intelligence does not come packaged in a gender. Intelligence stands on its own, male and female. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Absolutely powerful presentation and words. And I think that it's so important to understand that the empowerment of one does not mean the disempowerment of another. And that's definitely a great takeaway from what was shared. And sorry, my mind is just going, but it's interesting for us to consider solving 100% of our problems with 50% of our population. Those are my two major takeaways as we continue on that I'm definitely going to be taking with me when we make presentations on this subject. So I want to call up our next speaker, Ms. Charlene Paul from the Caribbean Women in Leadership to come and share her presentation. So let us welcome her as she comes.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And it is certainly a privilege to share the platform with my illustrious fellow panelists. We'd like to commend Matt, Aubrey, and the org team for a powerful symposium and definitely a must-have on an ongoing basis and continue the conversation. We in Caribbean Women in Leadership certainly support these efforts and want to continue the collaboration. Kofi Annan, in his UN Commission on the Status of Women presentation in 2005, said there is no tool for development more effective than the empowerment of women. No other policy is as likely to raise economic productivity or to reduce infant and maternal mortality. No other policy is as sure to improve nutrition and promote health. No other policy is as sure to improve nutrition, is as powerful in increasing the chances of education for the next generation. Madeleine Albright reminded us the world is wasting a precious resource in the dramatic underrepresentation of women in leadership positions, often resulting in the exclusion of women's talents and skills in political life. WomenDeliver.org. Women are not a minority, they are half of the world's population. For political institutions to be democratically legitimate and responsive to all citizens, they must be inclusive of the plurality of groups that exist within the population. This requires greater representation of women in national parliaments, and broader diversity. UN Women research further indicates that when the number of women in paid employment increases, economies grow. Companies with the greatest female representation in management deliver a return to shareholders which is 34% higher than in companies with the lowest representation. And when the share of household income controlled by women is increased, the amount of spending beneficial to children increases. One fact makes evident women's potential to contribute in significant ways is that women do 66% of the world's work, but earn only 10% of the world's income. Yet they reinvest 90% of their income into family and community. Selah. So there needs to be a deliberate focus on empowering Bahamian women, especially those in the lower socioeconomic sector, which by and large carries the weight of managing our households by more than 70%. We have heard earlier speakers and government ministers speak of the progress, development, and execution required in our nation. I submit to you and the people of the Bahamas that what we really need is to get more of our well-qualified, competent, transformational women to help shoulder the burden of political leadership and to bring the execution. I assure you, we will make quantum progress and help to get it done. On the flip side, when women are not at the table, women issues are not adequately addressed. The underrepresentation of women in STEM, for example, and that's the sciences, technology, etc., saw the design of systems and products like airbags and seat belts for cars that purely use male dummies and hence did not reflect the necessary protections for the female with a different structure. We see it in social policies that do not adequately address concerns such as gender-based violence, where women suffer disproportionately. And by the way, 1 in every 4 women in the Caribbean now has been or will be abused in their lifetime. There is also strong evidence that as more women are elected to office, there is an uptick in policy making that emphasizes quality of life and reflects the priorities of families, women, and ethnic and racial minorities. Now, we're grateful for the steps being taken, and in recent times, we've had a lot being said about gender-based violence and the legislation in that regard. But I'd like to re-echo the words of the leader of the opposition, actually, earlier in this symposium. He said, we're moving in the right direction, but not fast enough. We need righteous restlessness. I like that. Well, I'm here to proclaim that I believe amongst women in particular, there is certainly righteous restlessness. There is a cry and a demand for more action now. Less talk, more action. Just get it done. Women in politics. King's College London Global Institute for Women's Leadership tells us there is growing recognition of the untapped capacity and talents of women and women's leadership. And over the last 2 decades, the rate of women's representation in national parliaments globally has incrementally increased from 11.8% in 1988 to 17.8% in 2008 and 23.5% in 2018. And we've seen even more dramatic increases in sub-Saharan Africa and also in Asia. The total global representation, however, is still below the 30% benchmark, which is identified as that critical mass required to really make a difference. At home, we're below 20%. So we still have work to do. At this rate, the World Economic Forum postulates that it will take 100 years for gender parity. Countries must therefore be intentional in reaping the benefits of tapping into increased women political leadership. Now, there are several myths that have stemmed the progress of women in politics, and I'd just like to name some of them so when you hear them, you can recognize that it's a myth. One is that quotas are not necessary and that quotas undermine meritocracy. That's a myth. If we're going to move the needle at the rate that we need it, then there has to be definitive action. Myth, there aren't more women in senior roles because there aren't enough women with the right capabilities. We just heard. We have a lot of qualified women who are raising their hands and who are coming forward. Men are the ones who have to change. Well, as we heard, it's more than just men who have to change. We have women who also fail to recognize the need for gender parity. And the patriarchal mindset is not limited to our male counterparts. Unfortunately, many of our women believe that politics is for the men, and the women need to Another myth, once one woman has made it, it's easy for the rest to follow. No. We've seen that we've had a number of women who've made it, but it hasn't been any easier. Women don't have the same natural ambition as men. No. Women often, as our earlier speaker indicated, have more barriers, obstacles to jump over. And then a myth, women need to improve their confidence and speak up. Now, a woman's stereotypical communication style is relationship-oriented, and while a man's is power-oriented. So women tend to downplay their certainty, and men are more likely to minimize their doubts. And so this can be interpreted as a lack of confidence in women. But it's like a woman could be 100% able to do a job. But if she's asked questions, she'll step back. A man, on the other hand, may only have 30% capability, but ask no questions and be the typical know-it-all. That's just how we're wired, but it doesn't mean that we are incapable. The full and equitable participation of women in public life is essential to building and sustaining strong, vibrant democracies. That is the message, and that's the message we've got to send and continue sending until we get it. All persons need to get involved to make this a priority. So what are some action steps? Implement measures to ensure women have equal access to and full participation in power structures and decision making. Use temporary special measures such as quotas. Quotas in political parties' constitutions, voluntary quotas. These are seen as low-hanging fruit as opposed to legislative measures for quotas. The total number of countries in the world with constitutional, electoral, or political party quotas is 133. And out of those countries, they've garnered representation of women 27.5%. Another area is to review and update discriminatory laws and policies, and we've seen plenty action, and well, not action so much yet, but a lot of talk last week with the review of those discriminatory laws, and we certainly wish that well. Increase women's participation, women's capacity to participate through training and mentorship, and organizations such as Caribbean Women in Leadership, CVIL, I am pleased to say, is well on our way to doing that and assisting in that area. But we must encourage our people and governments to see gender diversity strategies and programs as long-term commitments, not just temporary talking points when it's popular. and we need to engage more men in the cause. We need men allies to also speak up. Now, I know that we also wanted to talk about youth, but I'm just going to say one thing because I know we have a well-able youth representative coming. And so all I would just indicate is that we do need to ensure participatory governance. Our youth need to be included. We need to ensure that they can see themselves. I believe when young people see other young people in leadership, that's a huge, strong motivation to succeed, to do well, and to do positive things. And so we want in all aspects youth arms of political parties to encourage local government, youth participation in local government, youth in parliament efforts, and the education in the schools as called for by our earlier speaker as well. In closing, the bottom line is when women are better represented in political leadership, nations do better. Children do better. Families do better. Let's do better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Once again, in incredible words. And I think the interesting thing in this topic in particular is from both the philosophical as well as the statistical side, when we look at just the power in these messages as well as what the numbers show. The solutions to many of these challenges, while they may take some time, are quite obvious that we do need more women at the forefront, and that the decisions that we make and the way that we include more women at the table will certainly have positive impacts. And I echo those sentiments of the leader of the opposition once more, that yes, we are moving in the right direction with a particularly high representation of women, for example, in the House of Assembly right now. But we must continue to build that momentum and move faster in the right direction. To keep us on topic, I want to call on Ms. Alicia Wallace from Equality Bahamas, and then we will anchor with Tate with the youth perspective. And so if we have her queued up, I want to welcome her to come and give her presentation. So as we bring her on, let's welcome her as she comes. I could clap for her. I think she might be able to hear, I think.
Course, an important one, and one that I hope, and I'm sure many of you hope, goes beyond conversation and moves into advocacy, consistent advocacy, and taking action. Given the time constraints, I'm going to be moving pretty quickly through the slides, but org has them. If you want the slides, you can always ask for them, and I'm happy for them to be made available to you. So since we've talked a little bit already about women in political leadership, I'm going to go especially quickly when we talk about numbers. We know that everyone has been talking since the last election about this amazing number of women that are in parliament. I'm one of the people that was like, that's not that amazing. 7 women, no, that's not cutting it. And it's also not the highest participation or representation of women that we have seen. We actually did better in 2002. So I think that's saying something and telling us how important it is to prevent rollbacks and to make sure that we are actually moving forward. Ms. Paul did talk about political quotas already, but I do want to reiterate that this is particularly important to set precedent, to get people accustomed to seeing women in positions of leadership and understanding that this is not a threat to any kind of meritocracy, and also to highlight that we allow men to be mediocre all the time, but for some reason women are held to this especially high standard. We're required to go through trainings and to be mentored and all of these things, which are great, but they should be required of people of all genders and not reserved just for women, because we are perfectly capable of leading. We live in the country, we know the experiences that we are having and our families are having, as we are in many cases heads of households. Moving on, I want to look at CEDAW. If you're not already familiar with it, please have a look. You can just Google CEDAW PDF or CEDAW articles and you'll be able to read it. It's quite a simple, easy to read convention. But Article 7 is the one that specifically looks at women in political life and public life. And you'll see there that I've highlighted eliminate discrimination against women in the political and public life, and ensure that women are able to vote in elections and also eligible for election. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that actually means, because it's not just as simple as, well, women can already just present themselves, that's it. No, we have to create an environment where it's actually possible and that these spaces are accessible to women. Moving on to the next slide, please. Here we have what the CEDAW committee said to the state, to the Bahamas, at the time of the last reporting, which was in 2018. The committee recommends that the state party make better use of temporary special measures. So an example of that is a quota. And in international spaces, particularly at the United Nations, the quota that's recommended is 30%. Equality Bahamas takes the position that 30% is not sufficient. That's not a high enough bar. We are 51% of the population, so let's go for at least 50% as a quota. The committee also called for the state to establish concrete goals and timeframes for strengthening the equal participation of women. So that means that we're not just going to say, yes, we need more women. We need to set goals that are very clear, and we all know about SMART goals, ensure that there are timeframes, but also toward meeting those goals, we need to ensure that we're creating the conditions necessary for women to be able to participate at this level. Looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, again, if you're not familiar, you can always Google, and there's a UN website that's dedicated to the SDGs. SDG 5 is all about gender equality and empowering women and girls. And target 5.5 of this goal, all of the goals have a set of targets, and those targets have indicators. Target 5.5 is about the full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision making. So we're talking about not just Parliament, but Senate, we're talking about the Cabinet as well, we're talking about local government. So you see that the SDG indicator 5.51 has two particular areas. The first, of course, is the national parliament, and the second is local government. So we need to go beyond the numbers when we're talking about women in political leadership. It's not enough to get more women in parliament. We have to be talking about the kinds of women. Who are the women that we want to have in parliament? We have already seen that just putting women in these seats and sticking them in social services is not serving us, because we end up with people who go on the news and say that marital rape is a private matter. That's not the kind of leadership that we need. We need feminist leadership. People who are thinking about those who are, quote unquote, on the margins, those who are in situations of vulnerability, who have the greatest need, who are most likely to be negatively impacted by decisions that are made that are not specifically considering them. So examples of feminist leadership and of considering people in situations of vulnerability. I have one here, the feminist policy on COVID-19, which Equality Bahamas was integral to drafting for the Feminist Alliance for Rights. And you can read that policy at tiny.cc/feminist policy. And once you read it, you'll see that we took different areas, including water and sanitation. We looked specifically at violence against women and domestic violence. We looked at social inequality and sort of forecasted, if we have all these measures, in particular, the curfews and the lockdowns, how will this particularly affect people in situations of vulnerability? And of course, we saw that domestic violence, there was a huge uptick. It was a serious issue all over the world. It's something that was easy to predict. So when you're having policies like this, they might be necessary, but think about the impact and what we can do to curtail some of these issues. Another example is the recommendations to end gender-based violence that Equality Bahamas put forward. And in this example, we did not sit around as a volunteer group and come up with all these solutions by ourselves. We went directly to the community. We invited people to join us for working sessions to hear from them about key issues in domestic violence, in gender-based violence more broadly, and get their ideas about how we need to address them, what we need to do in the areas of prevention, immediate response, and coming to a place of justice. You can access that at tiny.cc/endgbv policy. And of course, our more recent initiative, which is the Feminist Standards for Governance. And to get more about that, you can get in contact with me later on. Again, moving beyond the numbers, looking at acknowledgement of gender relations. So we don't want people to present themselves and ignore the fact that they're women, or to say that it doesn't matter that they're women. We would love to get to a place where it in fact doesn't matter, but right now it does. And girls need to see women in positions of leadership. And we need to understand that women are capable of leadership. Women are no more emotional than men. As Loretta Butler Turner mentioned, women are actually have done the best job worldwide in handling crisis, because this is what we are accustomed to doing. And I think the other speakers spoke about some of these gender stereotypes and some of these ideas about the way that women lead versus men, the way that women behave versus men. And these are all gender relations. These are all learned behaviors. These are by no means natural to women or natural to men. They're about the ways that we are raised and socialized. We also want to see women in leadership who have a particular respect and care for all women. Too many times we see, even in NGOs, women's organizations, having very narrow views of the issues that they are interested in, and also narrow views of women, having this idea that all women are middle class and go to church and are married and have 2.5 children. That's just not the case. We need to have someone or people in those spaces that have an intersectional approach and understand that we are women and people with disabilities. We are women and migrants. We are women and people who are experiencing poverty. Women are having all of these different experiences and are all deserving of access to our rights. And then finally, we want women in leadership who have imagination. We need people who are able to think not only outside of the box, but outside of what we already know, outside of what already exists, because what we have obviously is not good enough. We have systems that are not working for us, that are quite frankly working against us. So we need to think about how we can move beyond that, how we can build something new. So in order to do this, in order to get these kinds of women and to get women in positions of power, we have to create an enabling environment for them. That means eliminating barriers to entry. That includes gender discrimination. So Loretta Butler Turner talked about some of these examples of women experiencing violence and harassment because of their positions in public life, because of their positions in politics, and these ideas that these women belong at home with their man, taking care of their children, right? They don't belong in these spaces. We have to come up against that, and we need to have people in positions of power. That includes current members of parliament and senators, members of the cabinet. That means leaders of faith-based organizations, leaders of NGOs, coming against that and calling it out when they see it, that gender discrimination, that stereotyping, and let people know that it's wrong. We also need to address the burden of unpaid care and domestic work, because it's quite difficult to be a woman in public life, in politics, if you're still having to do all of the care work at home, taking care of your parents, your spouse's parents, the children, all of the domestic work. We heard that women do more than 60% more work than men do generally within the home, within the household, within the family. That needs to be addressed. And of course, the lack of funding. Women's campaigns need to be funded. We have the need for training and mentoring, just like every other gender needs it, and we need to see positive portrayal of women in public life. So the next few slides have some quotes from, and you can just snap pictures of them or take screenshots. I won't read them. We can just kind of roll through them, please. Quotes from the last CARICOM statement preparatory to CSW 65, which was the Commission on the Status of Women last year. And there was a particular focus on increasing the number and the proportion of women in politics. And CARICOM states, including the Bahamas, made commitments to take particular steps to ensure that we are creating the environment where women are able to participate at this level. That includes some of the things that I've already mentioned. That includes funding. That includes incentivizing the media to show women in positive ways and show women who are in these positions and doing well. That includes increasing young women's exposure to politics and to training and capacity development and mentoring. So these are the things that we need to do, not just talking about it, but making it happen, setting the goals, having the timeline, and doing the work within that time frame to ensure that we actually get there, to ensure our success. And now very quickly, I'm going to touch on youth participation in governance, because I really believe in inclusion. I believe in youth participation, women's participation, and the participation of all other vulnerable groups or marginalized groups, as some call them. A few years ago, I did a research project for the Royal Commonwealth Society as a part of the Equality and Justice Alliance, which was a consortium of NGOs in the UK that came together to help to resource governments that were interested in changing their discriminatory laws. You can find that report by going to the Royal Commonwealth Society website, navigating to their news and publications page, and then the research and reports. And you will see this report, and we'll go to the next slide to see some of the things that I found in my conversations with young people. So they called for their governments, and this is across the Commonwealth, to build and sustain relationships with them. They want to get past this sort of surface interaction where youth are just added at the end, or youth are only called on for a youth strategy. Youth should be involved in all of the policy making, all of the legislative processes that are happening. They want to have their capacity increased. Governments can put together resource hubs, they can provide funding, they can provide better civic education from school age, so that we're not just now as adults learning about, for example, the Constitution and why a referendum may be required to change certain articles of the Constitution so that we have gender equal nationality rights. They also wanted to see the development and execution of proper consultation processes. Again, not just having it at the end. The decision has been made, and now we're going to have a great meeting with 100 young people from across the Bahamas just to check a box and say that we talked to them. No, real involvement, real opportunities to provide feedback. And they want information to be shared with them, opportunities to be shared with them. For example, if you're sitting in this room right now or in the Zoom and you've never heard of CSW or the Commission on the Status of Women, and you're doing women's rights work, that's a failing. If you have never heard of CEDAW, like the critical tool for advancing the rights of women, that's a failing of the government, because we signed on to CEDAW in the 90s and we're reporting, or supposed to be reporting, every 4 years. The public needs to know that, and we need to know that we're able to contribute to those processes. And then the final thing is that young people want to be engaged and connected with other stakeholders, recognized as stakeholders and connected with others so that they can more fully participate in these processes. And then the last slide just has some contact information for Equality Bahamas. If you are interested in the work that we do and getting involved with ongoing work concerning human rights, particularly the human rights of women and LGBTQI plus people, we would be happy for you to connect with us. And we have lots going on and coming up very soon for International Women's Day, which is March 8th. If you didn't know already, mark it in your calendar. Thanks.
All right. Good. All right. Thank you so much, Alicia. Very informative presentation as usual, and we definitely salute you in the passion that you've shown to the advancement of the agenda for women's and girls here in country and regionally and worldwide. I want to keep moving along, and so I'm going to welcome my colleague Tate Adderley, who is our Freedom Schools Program Manager at the Organization for Responsible Governance, to give us the youth perspective. So he's speaking on behalf of all of the great young people, including myself, that are gathered here today. No pressure at all to be anchoring after such dynamic speakers. Let's welcome him as he comes.
Good afternoon to everyone. I'm just gonna wait a second until my presentation comes up. Okay, that's it. So this topic is a bit of a very important topic for me, as I am a public administration major at the University of the Bahamas. I'm a senior, and growing up, I was kind of always interested in politics and government. And my specific focus today is mainly public policy. That's what I'm interested in, and solving problems in our governance system. So as we begin, I just want to give a bit of an overview of what we touch on. So we talk about what is youth, we'll define what is governance, we'll talk about why youth is important in governance in the Bahamas, we talk about equity, how can we measure youth in governance, and possibly ways that we could be able to increase youth in governance. So the first definition that we're talking about is this idea of youth. And overall, this idea is a bit wonky, right? And when I say wonky, it's kind of fluid. There's no concrete way to understand or no concrete number to say what a young person is, right? However, the United Nations talks about it as a period of transition from dependence of childhood to adulthood's independence. So, like I said earlier, youth is a bit of a fluid concept, right? And so this definition essentially depends on various situations within the changes in demographic, financial, economic, and sociocultural settings, right? I don't know if you all can see that clearly, but I got this bit of a chart from the United Nations, and it talks about the different ways that people define age on a statistical level, right? So the UN Secretariat talks about young people being from 15 to 24. The UN Habitat Youth Fund talk about 15 to 32. UNICEF talks about adolescents being 10 to 19, also young people being from 10 to 24, and youth being from 15 to 24. And UNICEF says that you're a child until 18. And lastly, the African Youth Charter talks about youth being from 15 to 35. So as we can see, this idea of youth is a fluid concept, and it's a bit hard to define it by numbers. But what matters most is seeing it as a transition from independence of childhood to adulthood's independence. And then there's governance, right? So governance is a bit more easier to define. And governance is a system by which a country is run. It looks at all the building blocks of making and executing decisions for the future of a nation. And within that definition, we have making policy decisions and also looking at making sure the country is administrated well and it's managed well also. And so when we add these two words together, we can be able to define youth governance. And youth governance involves young people making decisions is youth governance. It focuses on the ways young people are involved in decision-making efforts at multiple levels of an initiative or organization. So this includes guiding the groups that hold the decision-making responsibility, or occasions where young people are actually at the chair, in the seat, making the decisions on policy issues. So let's talk a little bit about why are youth important in governance. And the first thing I want to touch on is there seems to be this growing apathy among young people regarding governance and politics, right? And if we want people to be involved more, if we want young people to be involved more, we have to get rid of this culture of apathy. And I think it results from this occurrence where things continue to remain the same, and we have the same patterns soaring up again and again and again of corruption and the nasty gutter politics that we see in the Bahamas today. But it's also important because young people are a significant voting bloc in the nation. And in the next slide, I'll talk about this idea of a social contract, right? No matter your age, no matter your sex, no matter your creed or religion, we all buy into this idea of the social contract. And if we believe in representation and inclusion, it's important to talk about young people in this process of civics. And the policymakers today as well, the decisions they make, the laws they implement today will affect us tomorrow down the road. And then we like to talk about this idea of majority rule. And it essentially goes beyond race and gender. We want to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table to make sure that their concerns and needs are met. And then overall, in including young people in governance, right? We want to train the generation for tomorrow. We want to train tomorrow's leaders. There's always this idea that we should wait our turn or wait, but when does that come? And so if we want people to be able to deliver and to lead tomorrow, I think we have to start caring more about youth governance in the Bahamas. And then lastly, equity, right? This idea of the social contract, it talks about the contract of us agreeing to form a government and a state, right? And we all buy into this idea. And so equity talks about everyone getting their fair share and their needs and concerns being met. And we have an agreement in the social contract in the Bahamas, right? And every Bahamian has an ownership in that government. We tend to believe that government is distinct from us, but government comes from us. And we are a part of this process of governance, young people that is, because we like to think of voting as one shot and it's done, and we don't have to do anything else. But yeah, I've been open to this perspective to think that voting is a process, and it's the beginning of a process, right? In the social contract, whereas we say, hey, we're going to come together and we're going to decide which particular group is supposed to represent us for the next 5 years. And once we have that agreement, we say, hey, this is the group that we want to represent us from the majority vote. We have to then say that what can we do now as citizens of the Bahamas to push them forward and to help them and to give them our ideas as young people to make sure that our needs are being met as a bloc. And so overall, the greatest concerns of young people today is, most importantly, we want to be able to comfortably live in the Bahamas. We care about affordable housing. We care about issues of finding a job after leaving school. And most of all, and overall, we care about our nation. We care about our futures in this nation. So I found this diagram. This is Roger Hart's ladder of participation, and it looks at different rungs or levels of participation. Rung 1 talks about manipulation, where there are adult-led activities in which youth do as directed without understanding or for the purpose for the activities. Then at the top, we have youth-initiated decisions with adults. So these are youth-led activities in which decision-making is shared between youth and adults and working as equal partners. And I don't know where we are right now, but when I do have personal conversations with persons that are involved in the youth arm of their particular political parties, it seems as though that we are at level 2, right? Where that we have adult-led activities in which youth understand their purpose, but they have little input in how they are planned. So essentially, the idea that I get from them is that they are used as a show to get the youth bloc in the country, and then once the election is over, then that's it. Okay, and I think that's quite unfortunate. But I want to get to a future whereas we get to now rung 8, whereas we have youth-initiated shared decisions with adults, where that is youth-led activities in which decision-making is shared between young people and adults, and they're working as equal partners. Sorry. And so lastly, how can we increase youth participation? I think, and this is a conversation that I need to have with young people, and this is talking to young people more so, is that I think we need to organize as a voting bloc to convey our concerns. And I'm happy to see the Youth and Student Government Association here today. That was the beginning of my interest in leadership at the University of the Bahamas. I was in student government for about 2 years. But I think that organizing and mobilizing is a signal, or it sends a message to the political class that we are serious about what we want to do. And then that could probably be the beginning of our concerns being taken seriously at the governance level. And then next, we must talk about this idea of rebuilding trust in our civic processes, because earlier I talked about this idea of apathy among young people, that, you know, although we may vote, nothing will change significantly when it comes to elections. So I think, on the other hand, and in this relationship between government and citizens and young people, I think that governments must begin the process of rebuilding trust in our civic processes. And then maybe we may be able to see where young people are getting involved and getting informed and trying to become partners in this idea of good governance. Then there's also hiring young professionals that can make decisions in the public sector. I think the former Prime Minister, Dr. Minnis, I think it was the last fiscal year before he was, I think he was thinking of a policy whereas they were going to allocate a certain amount of money for about 20 young professionals to get involved in the public service or the public sector. I thought that was a good initiative. And then there's also the ideas of quotas within legislation for elections for young people. And that could be another aspect of trying to increase youth participation. But overall, thinking about principles, most importantly, we as young people have a right in the future of our country, most of all. And the social contract, I think it's important because we don't believe that we have some say in this, but we pay taxes every day, we pay duty on the things we bring into the country. So that is an example of why we should take governance more seriously, because everything that governments do, everything that policymakers do affect us. And so youth participation is very important in governance. And thank you very much. That is the end of my presentations.
All right, thank you so much, Tate. Definitely a very, very important and informative presentation about the representation of young people in the country. And I won't hold you up with my biases, being a young professional and having a family, and what it feels like when it seems that you're out there doing everything that you can to contribute in a meaningful type of way, but you're being classified elsewhere. It must feel very similar to a lot of the challenges that women in the country face, which is why it's so important to have these conversations that will garner action, and to remain connected in spaces like these where we can talk about such tangible solutions to the challenges that we see. We are near wrap-up time, so if there are any questions, we'll take them very, very quickly. And if not, we will carry on and bring all of the folks back into our main session for a brief wrap-up, as well as those that are joining us via Zoom. So if anyone has any questions, if not, we will. All comments that this is wonderful stuff. Right. Very informative. So I just want to thank our panelists one more time for their participation.